All right. Hello and welcome back, everyone. This is Ben Chiriboga, the Chief Growth Officer here at Nexel, sitting down with Moray McLaren for another This Legal Life. Moray, welcome to the show. Very happy to have you. How are you today, sir?
Very nice to see you, Ben, as always, and thank you for inviting me to be on the show.
I've been looking forward all week, actually. Well, ever since I got back from my retreat to this conversation between you and I. I think in some sense, when you meet somebody within the legal industry that you are very simpatico with, you tend to very quickly see that they are understanding things or seeing things in a similar worldview. In the legal industry, we have many worldviews, but you, sir, I think are somebody that I tend to see the world very much through your eyes. That's just a setup to how excited I am to speak with you today. We're going to be talking about leadership. We're going to talk about many things. But before we get into that, Moray, you've had a very distinguished career over the course of the last 30 years. Whenever I check your LinkedIn profile, you're either a professor at some university or publishing a recent Harvard paper, which we're going to get into. But Moray, take us back. Tell us a little bit about where you are today, who you are, for those of you who aren't familiar, and really, what is it about Moray and his life within the legal industry?
Well, thank you, Ben. Interesting you mentioned your reset, and I think it'd be nice to get into some of that reset. This is a time of year where, by chance, I've spent the last few weeks checking in with law firm leaders globally as they think about their vacation, and it'd be nice to get into some of the issues that they've got on their mind as they pack their suitcases. You mentioned 30 years. I can't believe it's been 30 years already for my legal life. I guess the first 10 years was about clients and markets, and when you said to law firm partners back then, put your hand up if you have a marketing plan, there'd be some embarrassed faces in the room. Maybe a third would be thinking quite clearly about the type of work they wanted to do and for which specific clients. And then, of course, I'd have to ask that question. I couldn't help myself. Keep your hand up if you actually do anything in your marketing plan. And of course, the majority of hands would go down. The second 10 years was fascinating because I had this wonderful title as a strategy consultant, and you feel very important. You get to travel around the world in business class, helping some very senior and very serious law firms think strategically about what they should be doing in terms of their growth. However, there's always a however, isn't there, Ben?
There is.
You'd go back and see them a year or two later. How is that fantastic strategy you agreed? And there'd be some awkward silences and some embarrassment. And then hence my last 10 years has been about, what holds law firms back from doing some of the simple things they should. These strategies were good. They weren't complicated. There are clear opportunities for law firms out there, but what are the behaviors that hold law firms back? And I think, what is the leadership requirement in trying to build momentum amongst partners, commitment amongst partners to getting some of these done, aligning partners and making sure that they're all on the same page, and giving them some sense of direction as they get there.
Moray, when you think about how these problems are coming together, you took us through the last 30 years. And when you think about how these problems together, it almost seems like we're at a cross point in the industry where culture is coming to a head in a way that it's never done before. Is that sort of a fair assessment? And if it is, well, why is it that culture, specifically around partnerships, specifically around partners, specifically around partners, and we're going to get into this around leadership culture, why is it that culture is so big right now?
Well, I mean, as always, you can take two opposing views. One is really that we're just catching up with what's been required all the way through. To what extent, when we talk about partnerships, are they really partners pulling in the same direction, in the same boat, paddling in the same direction, or is it a group of partners that are in their individual canoes? Now, to some extent, this is something we've always spoken about. However, I'd have to agree. I do think we're in this really interesting inflection point. I mean, the question that I've had on mind as we've come through this COVID period is two things. To what extent will what brought us here bring us there? That's what we're calling in our projects, fit for the future. We go into a different law firm almost every week. Are you fit for the future? There's a second element, and it depending on the culture of every firm, it can be incredibly strong or not, which is some partners saying, in fact, do we really want to go back to where we were? There was such a strong inflection point for many individual practitioners during that period of COVID. They got to spend time with their families. They got to walk the dog in the morning and go to the gym. We do have a percentage of some partners in the law firm saying, look, do we all have to run at the same speed? Or are we going to recognize going forward the different strengths of partners better and the different motivations? And that, I think, is becoming an increasing challenge. But if we think of that period, I'm just reflecting on the conversations at the moment with these law firm leaders, and this would be my kind of weather report on where I see law firms globally being. 2022, so just 2 years ago, if we can remember back then, law firms were still on an exceptional high. Partners were glad to be alive. There'd been these golden years of performance throughout that COVID period, and we still had that wonderful feeling of unity that any organization goes through when they go through such a traumatic period, and all the partners feel they're on the same page. 2023, so a year ago, things were starting to get a little bit patchy. Some of those tensions were returning. And we can talk about what those leadership tensions have been in law firms, with pockets of optimism. I have to say, Ben, I'm a huge optimist, and I do see the glass is half full, and I do see huge opportunities. And what I'm seeing at the moment, and it's that there's a definite feeling of some heavy lifting to be done in the leadership space. In your part of the world, interestingly enough, we're seeing a lot of office openings and closings. So there is that question as people think about vacation: where should we be? And what resources do we need in those cities? And if you want to, we can talk about which American cities are going through that change. There's that question of partner evaluation. Not only just that, do we all need to, as partners, run at the same speed? But to what extent? I've been asked more recently than ever, what should be the typical spread in a law firm remuneration from the lowest earning partner to the highest? And we're coming to that stage, and it is a definite sign of stormy weather on the horizon of maybe some of our partners are earning too much, but what about our highest earners? Where should they be? And that difference between the lowest and the highest earning partners is definitely going to be spread. That leads us into the question of partnership structure. We've been asked to do a survey at the moment on what is the role of a salary partner, and what's the difference in a salary and equity partner? Because the salary partner role seems to be misfiring in a lot of law firms at the moment. Is it a very helpful tool to help us in our career management and the testing ground into partnership, or is it a car park where we're putting people that we don't think will make equity, we're just avoiding having difficult conversations? And in parallel, we think it's going to increase profitability, and it should. However, in many firms, actually, that salary partner role is a marzipan layer across the top of projects that is taking away our profitability. And what about those wonderful firms that during COVID took what I think is the right decision to bring people into equity, despite the challenges, because they were worried about skipping a generation of young partners? However, those young partners that have come into equity haven't been able to perform at the level required. And I think that I know you're very close to this question of business development in law firms, but there seems to be a group of young partners in every firm. The firms bet on them, but they're not yet getting up to speed in terms of client relationships. They're not getting up and out of the office. They're not networking. They're not developing their profile. The firms have invested financially in them, but they're not getting the return. And I think that goes back to the headline at the moment, which is this must be this margin squeeze. The cost of delivery going up, but the profitability is seriously at risk in a number of firms.
When you're talking, you've brought up so many issues in some sense that, in a way, if we had to describe our point in history right now, it would almost be like more questions than answers. First of all, is that a fair characterization? I mean, am I mirroring back what is the state of that? So we're in a state of questioning, and framing the questions, of course, are incredibly important. But is that why we're in this period of change? Because more questions are coming up than we've traditionally had answers for, using whatever lever we've used: people, clients, remuneration, a handful of things. Is it that the old levers aren't working for the questions that are coming up?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, the thing is, I've always been a huge optimist about the partnership model. And I'm always speaking at conferences every week where there's someone telling us the law firm model is broken, law firms aren't going to be successful. I mean, law firms have grown, profitability has increased. I think the inflection point is we just don't know what's going to happen next. The change we see globally is driving high-value legal services, but inevitably uncertainty will pull it back. And I think, you know what? I mean, if I was being very honest, I think we spent a lot of time over the last 30 years talking about what law firms need to do. I think we're almost tired of hearing ourselves say it. I think this is a stage when maybe more of it needs to happen. And you flag leadership. I mean, what is the role of a leader at the firm? Are partners willing to be led? What are they willing to empower their leaders to do? And let's talk about the elephant in the room. Are law firm partners willing to be held accountable for some of this stuff? Because I don't know about you, but I've spoken to so many law firms over the last 30 years that say they're collegial. And it's only now I'm realizing, I know I'm rather slow on these things, collegial law firms are very happy. And because I don't come to you and say, Ben, why haven't you done what you said you would do? And you won't come to me and say the same. Now, we can be collegial when the water's rising because we all take out more money every year. But I suspect with this stormy weather ahead, there are some very serious conversations that have to be had in law firms of, okay, we like being collegial. It sounds good. However, what aspects of our culture are we going to fight for? We think they're really important. But are there any aspects that we think we need to change? What are the aspects of culture that we need to change? There's a huge issue at the moment about bans and about performance within law firm bans. And there's a lot of law firm leaders that have in place what looks on paper like a very safe system that unless partners perform to certain financial levels, they won't be promoted up these, call them locksteps, call them bans. I mean, there seems to be a huge sort of unification of the approaches. Law firm leaders say, look, on paper, I should be able to enforce these guardrails around profitability in my firm. The reality is I am feeling exceptionally vulnerable because when they go and talk to some very senior, important people in their organizations about profitability, which they should be doing, let's be honest, they're getting a very serious pushback. So we're having to go into these firms and say to the partners, look, either you don't have guardrails around profitability and you do, and could you, if you have got guardrails, could you be guilty of saying you want them, nodding and agreeing with your leadership and having them without understanding what the consequences are?
Yes.
Would you be comfortable with your partner, with your leadership taking them seriously? Or if not, let's just acknowledge we're wasting everybody's time. Time is short. Your leads are very busy. There's other things to do. Do you really want them to focus on profitability? And are you going to support them in doing that? I.e., don't go into corridors and criticize the leadership for what they're trying to do. Or are you going to pass on that one and think about other things? Because there's a huge frustration building, in law firms globally on this profitability point at the moment.
Right. Let me the substantive conversation, even though this conversation has been incredibly substantive already, the substantive conversation that we wanted to cross over was the idea of the new partner, specifically around the idea of leadership. But I want to ask you, and going back to your history, because you're interesting and you're a focal point of this podcast as well. Considering your time within law firms at Dentons, considering your time at the IBA, considering the last 20 years, when you think about the idea of leadership as a core skill as something that partners were reaching for, take us back a little bit. Describe what leadership meant over that period of time, because I think that's going to be a nice setup to these conversations about, well, how do you empower new leadership so that they can put in guardrails, so that they can focus on profitability? We'll get to profitability here, but I want to go back, and I like a development into where are we at and why is this sort of crucial right now? Is that fair enough? Can you take us back in terms of how leadership has developed over the last coming years and bringing us to this focal point right now where we're making real decisions about real leadership qualities, and we're making a leadership class, if I can so use that word, we're creating a leadership class within law firms to really handle, it seems like, these changing natures. Fair enough. So can you take us back a little bit?
Yeah, no, and it's such a good question. My personal confession is 30 years ago, I was very lucky to be taught by someone called Professor Stephen Mason. And what he told me 30 years ago is lawyers confuse leadership with management.
Right.
Yes. They appoint very able leaders to manage and almost always neglect leadership. Now, I have a book by Stephen Mason next to the side of my bed, and I carry it around in my suitcase wherever I go in the world. And I think that if we ask Professor Stephen Mason what progress has he seen in this area, he's long retired by now or close to retirement. I'd find it very hard to think that there has been the progress made. And what I have to say, to go back to this COVID point, the unforeseen consequences of COVID is what's very clear is you can manage people when they're in the office, but when they're working flexibly, you have to lead. So once every couple of weeks, I'm in the room with a group of partners. We start off by saying, your leadership has asked us to think about what your role is as a partner and what you need to do. And it goes back to this point of, will what brought us here take us there? That we think about leadership as this group of specially anointed people in law firms. To go back to the Stephen Mason point, often law firms were electing or anointing very good leaders and asking them to be managers. Today, not only do we expect that leadership team to lead, I think we have to be very aware of what is the role of a partner in a law firm to lead. What's their leadership role in terms of developing clients, stronger client relationships? But the more complicated bit is what's their leadership role in terms of delegating and supervising to their junior people. Very interestingly, we just did research with one firm where we asked their associates, what is the number one thing you think you'd expect from a leader in your firm? And the number one thing they said is empathy. Right. We then asked them, if you were to categorize and classify the abilities of the partners in your organization, how would you score them in terms of empathy? And I don't want to embarrass the firm in question, but you can imagine the gap between their expectation and the requirement. And as the board said to us when we presented the results, they said, I have to laugh, Ben. They said, can we teach our partners empathy? That was a question from the board. What do you think? What's your view on this?
My sense is that there is a way to learn how to project empathy in a social situation, but empathy deeply, I think, comes from the idea of curiosity and a move out of transactionality into a more relationship way of basically being things, and not to credit or not to default to sort of biases, but based on today's workflow and economic, socioeconomic on a small scale, but also large scale, transactionality tends to be the base layer at which most people within the law firms are relating and dealing with. So they don't have the circumstances to basically try to do true empathy. Instead, it's empathy light, let's say, to be gracious.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think the question is, can you fake it till you make it? I think you're totally right. You can fake empathy. You can say to people that are very directive or people that are huge introverts, why not start a meeting by saying, hey, Ben, how did the wedding go at the weekend? No?
Yeah.
How was your kid's christening? You can suggest that people do that. And I think you can make some efforts towards that. However, as the Americans say, you can smell BS. And that requirement for authenticity is so huge now from the younger generation. However, when I hear myself say younger generation, one thing that's very clear in all of the research we're doing is we did totally overestimate the generational differences.
Yes.
We owe a huge apology to any partners in law firms listening to this that are 43 years and under, because we had fun blaming the millennials and Gen Y, didn't we? For everything that was going wrong in law firms for the last 20 years, we now realize that their perspective and their requirements, their motivators, isn't any different to other generations of law firm partners. However, there was a generational war, and there was this huge polarization in the way we view different generations and the way we communicate. However, if you do look at the motivators for partners today, it'll be very, very similar to other partners. There's no big difference. The three things that the research we do that is showing is, firstly, this question of purpose. Is bigger than we all could ever imagine. And while we thought 30 years ago that the purpose of let me take a step back. 30 years ago, you're too young to remember, law was a vocation, and the word vocation has purpose wrapped around it. So you'd be a partner in a law firm and you feel that you had a purpose that came from that. Now, today, we're viewing the professions in a very different way. There is this question globally about the end of expertise and the end of experts, and we're having to go into hyperdrive in terms of what the purpose is and what the meaning for the people in our organizations is. The second one is work-life balance. Law firms are tripping themselves up with this concept of work-life balance, where I think honesty and openness is good. If you are a brain surgeon or a doctor, people might have car crashes outside the weekend. They might need a surgeon on a Saturday morning. And I think we have to just be really more honest with our young people about what the career deal is. And if they do want to be, in an environment where they learn and develop their career as a young professional, that might mean working different hours and in different ways. And the final one, of course, is we have to recognize that there is a much greater movement between law firms than we've ever seen. So there's a huge wave of lateral hires, and you will see the headlines the way I do, where there's a huge drive and there's a huge salary inflation at the moment. And yes, young people will expect to be paid more, but they won't understand naturally that requires more billable hours, and that's a whole extra level of pressure that they wouldn't have had in the past.
I want to, let's say the last 10 minutes of this, you've been very gracious with your time. I want to kind of piece a little bit all of this together around the idea of why the changing nature of leadership and the leadership skills are so important. What you've just described when we're talking about young partners is the idea that there might be a meaning crisis because the practice is transitioning to a business, and with in some sense with good reason, right? And we can put that aside, but let's just bracket that maybe that was a necessary evolution, but inevitably you moved it from a vocation to a practice, and there was a loss of meaning in there to some extent. Then you have this idea that there's of course more questions than answers from the perspective of profitability. High times came to sort of low times, all the rest of it. And then you lastly have law firms have traditionally put leaders to be managers, and the changing nature, just let's say, of the inter office relationship, culture, and dynamics, and sort of the changing. When you take those three things together, it, of course, you have meaning, changing inter office dynamics, and general socioeconomics. You have these quadrants. Of course, you're going to have a changing nature. And of course, what's been done over the last 20 something years, which is managers managing people remotely while having the benefit of having meaning sort of inside the profession. Are you getting what I'm trying to put down? I'm trying to paint the picture and why there's like sort of a new call for this sort of leadership. I'm trying to get to the why that will never have a why, of course. But
no, I couldn't agree more. And just to put the cherry on the top of the cake, I think we're saying we're getting to the core of my 30-year experience of why strategy fails in law firms.
Right. Yes. Exactly. Right.
Because we have to not only talk about what motivates our people. I think we have to ask what motivates us as partners within our own organizations. Mm-hmm. And if strategy was failing, the issue is that strategy was often defined at the firm level and forgetting the individual motivation of the partners within it.
Yes. Right.
So if I used to work with boards and look at markets, do a lot of detailed research about opportunities, we were forgetting that the most obvious question would be, what is success for the partners in your firm? Why do they join your firm? They could go to another firm in your city. And what does success look like on the personal level? Secondly, if we understand what success means to your individuals, what does that mean in terms of their requirement at the firm level? And then I just remember the frustration of the leadership teams and firms that felt all the partners would be on the same boat and aligned to going forward. Yeah. And the reality that a lot of these firms are really still a group of individuals. And that has to take us to not only to the behaviors, but to the motivation. And the question which I have in mind as I travel around is, do law firms get the behaviors they need, or do they get the behaviors that they recognize and reward? Yes. We talk a lot about collaboration without getting into the detail that law firms are very guilty of saying they want a certain set of behaviors and that partner collaboration, where their financial reward and recognition is pulling in a different direction. And I think that's the pending piece of work for many firms. And I think that's often where, what do you say? What would you say as an American? The rubber hits the rubber hits the road? Yeah. Or there's some more honest and open expressions we could talk about. Fans and fans and other things and whatever. Yeah, right. Yes, right. Flying things. Yes, right. Exactly. But by the way, you're okay with me calling you an American? Apologies. It's a bit like you calling me English when I'm from Scotland. Are you comfortable being described as an American? I like to think of myself as a world citizen that's born and raised in the United States. But yes, of course, yeah. I want to end this with a quote that I took from a presentation that you were kind enough to throw my way. And we already went over the lawyers can be managed in the office but remotely. That was another good one. But it's another one, and it said you cannot overtake 15 cars in sunny weathers, but you can whenever it's raining. And of course, that's by the fabulous Brazilian driver Senna. But you're an optimist. I'm an optimist. We see culture and the changing nature of leadership as inherently sort of the promised land. And we also know that it's about asking the right questions and framing the right questions. Moray, if you were given and blessed and anointed, just to continue this word, with the idea to change law firms in the right direction, to capture the opportunity of that it is raining right now, and you are fourth in line, but you'd like to be first on the poll, what would you do? Where would you start?
What are you advising today?
Yes, a very good point. And I have to confess, the quote from Ayrton Senna, I got from Wim de Jong, who was the exceptional managing partner at senior partner at Allen Overy. Okay, so I would try and say in a nutshell, we have to get better and we have to do some of the things that we know we need to do. So I'm not saying anything new, so apologies for this. In terms of clients, who are the clients that we should make a concerted effort to follow, and for what type of practice areas? When we do surveys of clients, law firms often say, can we come and interview the clients and what they like and don't like at the firm? They will say, you know what, we think Ben is exceptional. However, we don't know about the other partners in the organization and we'd like to get them to know them better. So Ben's doing a brilliant job. Partners around the world are doing a brilliant job pushing the rock up the mountain with individual client relations. The more they can structure that, the more they can gain support from their business development people. Law firms have such brilliant business development people. I don't know if you feel the same frustration, but they're not allowed to do what they should be able to do in the way they should.
Yes, of course.
So clarity and doing more of that together. In terms of the people, it's really, what is our promise to our people? And let's move beyond the BS and understand why they join our organizations and actually be more authentic and honest about some of the relationships. I mentioned earlier the research we're doing around salary partners, and unfortunately what we're finding loud and clear is that the reason why people are drifting from associates to senior associates, from senior associates into salary partners, is the avoidance of tough conversations and honesty.
Yeah.
And there's a huge shout from young people nowadays, give me feedback, tell me whether I'll make part of this organization, but don't worry if not, because I'm able to go somewhere else. And that third element, as you said so clearly, is what is our role as leaders? We do expect every partner in a law firm today to step up to the plate, to fulfill that promise to their people and their clients. And then someone really has to volunteer for those top roles. And I use the word volunteer because sadly in many of our organizations, that there isn't a clear enough definition of the role of leader. They're not developing their young leaders and investing in their young leaders. And for those people, I mean, I don't want to end on a negative note, Ben. For those people currently in leadership roles at the moment in law firms, it's becoming exceptionally lonely. They're under huge pressure. They often have to do their legal work at the same time. And we really have to think about what we want from those people, give them better training and support, and understand that it is tough because some of those people at the moment feel that they're going to battle with their partners every day at the moment, Ben. Would you sign up to run a law firm at the moment globally? Would that be something you'd volunteer to do?
You know, I'm such a perpetual optimist that in some sense, absolutely, because in a way, marginal gains applied over even 5 to 10 years seem to be it will seem to have a compound interest. And today, let's say in a very competitive labor market, if honestly, if you're asking me, if you can create a culture that seems to be distinguished and seems to be differentiated and seems to have this in check and aligned, it would seem to be like a place where people would want to come to work. Now, easier said than done, of course, but it seems to be like from a competitive gain, absolutely.
Well, that's probably a very good point to end. For those people planning their vacations at the moment, let's remember that Rome wasn't built in a day.
Right.
What are the 2 or 3 things you should be focusing on when you come back that will help? I've always got this image in my mind of what will make the boat go faster. You mentioned I'm a professor. Well, I teach at Cambridge University. One of the people on the faculty with me is a gold medal winning rower. And what his trainer said to them when they were discussing and getting worried about all the things that have to happen within rowing, you're preparing for the big race. And what the trainees say to them is, can we not just focus on what will make the boat go faster? There's a lot of background noise in law firms, but what are those 2 or 3 things that a leader can focus on to help their organization get faster and do better? I think that's a wonderful starting point for vacation.
Yeah. And I think that this is a good place to end this podcast today with you, Moray. Let's wrap up. Give us a summary of maybe shout out the Harvard article, the research paper that you just did. Give us a little bit of insight into there. We'll put it in the show notes. But then also in your legal life, what's coming up over the next 6 months will be at the end of the year. Isn't that a little bit crazy? But yeah, tell us where you'll be. Possibly, I think I'll probably be sitting down with you at the IBA. But yeah, what else is on your dance ticket for the rest of the year?
Yeah, perfect. So the research we did is called The Perfect Partner. I have to thank David Wilkins at Harvard Law School for helping us put that together. He's published that. You'll find that on the Harvard Law School website. In terms of what comes next, our next major bit of research is what is that salary partner role? What is the uses and abuses we're currently seeing in terms of the salary partner role? A number of equity-only firms have on the top of their agenda for the autumn. Should they be thinking about a salary partner role or not? It's interesting. I was looking at the research this morning. For a large number of equity-only firms, you're in exactly the right place. However, you have to understand why you're there and what that means in terms of best practice. And then I think, in terms of the autumn, I think I'll see you in Mexico, probably at the IBA conference. Are you going to be there?
I will absolutely be there. Orale. Yes, we will be there in full force, I think, actually, with the rest of the Nexel team. So very excited about sitting down with you. The rest of Lexington consultants, I know they'll probably be in, but I think this is about as good a place to wrap up. Moray, thank you so much for the time. As usual, it is very, very nice to chat shop with a very like-minded person, perpetual optimist, Moray McLaren, signing off here with Ben Chiriboga. As for another This Legal Life, Moray, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ben.
Cheers, everybody.